If you've wiped down the same shelf twice in 1 week and it was dusty again by Friday, you haven't done anything wrong. You're not missing a product. You're not skipping a step. You just might have more surfaces than you realize. Most cleaning advice never gets to that. It tells us to clean more often, use the right cloth, get the right spray, and we do all of that. And the dust comes back every time because the dust was never really the problem. The surfaces are. Amish homes aren't clean because someone is working harder or longer. What they have is simply less for dust to land on. Not bare, not empty, not cold or unwelcoming, just thoughtfully simple. And when we understand how they think about the objects in their homes, something shifts in how we see our own spaces. Today, we're walking through 7 things Amish families do differently, and how we can bring that same thinking into our own homes, not all at once, not as a project, just as a way of seeing things a little more clearly than we did before. Let's start with the smallest corner in the house, because it makes one of the biggest differences. Look at any Amish window from the outside and something quietly catches your attention. The sill is empty. No row of figurines, no trailing plant pots, no cluster of framed photos gathered near the light. Just the window, and beyond it, whatever's outside. There's a very practical reason for that. Windowsills sit directly in the path of moving air. Every time a nearby window opens, every draft that passes through the room, particles shift, and they drop the moment that air slows down. A sill lined with objects catches every one of those particles. They settle into the gaps between figurines, along the base of a plant pot, into the edge of a frame. And those gaps are almost impossible to clean around properly without moving everything off first, which means most of us don't. We clean around them. And so layers build slowly in the spaces between objects week after week until the dust becomes part of the surface itself. Clearing a windowsill takes about 5 minutes. Nothing has to leave the house. A nearby shelf or cabinet holds those same items perfectly well. But removing them from that specific spot, right where air movement is strongest, changes how quickly that whole corner of the room accumulates. And there's something else worth noticing. A clear window changes how the room feels. It feels lighter. The air has a different quality to it. A little more open, a little less settled. That isn't just a visual impression. In a small, real way, it's exactly what's happening. That's our first small win. And it leads us directly to the next question. Because if you're wondering why that windowsill gets so gray so quickly, the answer is usually standing just inside the front door. Here's something most cleaning advice never mentions. A significant portion of what settles inside our homes walks in with us. Every time we come through the front door, we bring the outside in. Particles from the soles of shoes travel from the entrance through every room we walk into. Fine debris from clothing and coats drifts off as we move through the house. The windowsill we just cleared, the shelf in the hallway, the kitchen counter, they're collecting what we're carrying in as much as anything else. Amish households have always had a clear transition at the entry point, a deliberate pause between outside and inside. Shoes come off at the door without exception. Coats get shaken outside before they come in. There's a small mat, a row of hooks, a bench. Nothing elaborate. Just a habit, built into the rhythm of coming home. Most of us don't have a mudroom, an apartment, a condo, a ranch home. There may be no defined entry space at all. Just a door that opens directly into the living area. That's completely fine. This isn't about the space, it's about the habit. A small mat just inside the door, a hook or a chair nearby for coats, the simple practice of leaving shoes at the entrance rather than walking them through the house. That one change means the particles that would have traveled from the front door to the bedroom to the kitchen to every flat surface along the way stop at the threshold instead. It doesn't fix what's already inside, but it changes what we're adding every single day. And when we stop adding as much, every space we've already cleared stays cleaner for longer. Think of it this way. The windowsill and the entryway work together. One stops dust from settling. The other reduces how much dust arrives in the first place. That's already a system beginning to form. And now that we've seen two concrete things and what they actually address, there's something worth pausing on before we go further. Something most decluttering content skips past entirely. And for our generation, skipping it doesn't feel right. We keep things out for a reason. For many of us, the objects in our homes aren't just objects. They're a kind of map. The figurine on the windowsill that belonged to a sister, the stack of magazines from a hobby we keep meaning to return to, the extra chair that was always someone's chair. Having these things visible, out and present, that feels like keeping life organized in a way that makes deep sense to us. Out of sight has sometimes felt like out of mind, and at this stage of life, that can carry a weight that younger people don't always fully understand. So, when someone says, clear the surfaces, what we sometimes hear underneath that is, let go of your life. And that's not what we're saying, not today, not ever on this channel. Here's what the Amish perspective actually offers. And it's different from that entirely. It isn't about hiding the things you love, it's about protecting them. Consider this honestly for a moment. An object sitting uncovered on an open surface for months, collecting dust in its grooves, turning gray along its edges, standing in a cluster with other things nobody moves. Is that really being honored? Is that display, or is that neglect wearing a very gentle disguise? When something you genuinely treasure is brought out with intention, placed where it belongs for the season or the occasion, and then stored safely where dust can't reach it, that object is being cared for, kept. There is a real difference between displaying something and warehousing it in plain sight. That's the shift this video is really about. Not remove what matters, but care for what matters well enough to protect it. As you're listening to this, take a slow look at the nearest flat surface. How many of those items have you actually touched since yesterday? Just notice. You don't have to do anything with that yet. We're moving now from those small corners, the windowsill, the entryway, into the rooms themselves. And this is where the same thinking begins to work at a larger scale. In Amish homes with open shelving, what you find on display tends to be things that get touched regularly. Plates in use that week. A jar being opened and returned. A book someone is halfway through. The regular contact. The simple act of picking something up, using it, and putting it back disturbs dust before it has a chance to fully settle. Objects we haven't touched in 6 months have been collecting quietly the entire time, building in layers we don't notice until we finally move them and see the outline they've left behind. Now, this is where a lot of people stop and say, but some of those things are meaningful to me. And that is completely true and completely respected. The question isn't whether something meaningful should stay. It's just whether it's being treated as meaningful. If something matters to us, it deserves more than a layer of gray settling quietly over it on a shelf. Try one small thing this week. Walk through one room, just one, and notice which objects you reach for regularly and which ones you move around without ever actually picking up. That's the whole exercise. Just notice. Awareness is where this process starts, and it costs nothing at all. The sitting room is where this gets quietly interesting, because the problem here isn't what we can see, it's what we can feel. Amish sitting rooms are simple when it comes to fabric. Functional seating, a plain curtain, perhaps one throw in regular use. The fabric present in the room is fabric being used. Fabric holds fine particles deep in its fibers and releases them back into the air every time someone sits down nearby, adjusts a cushion, or walks through the room. It's one of the most overlooked sources of airborne particles in a home. A heavy curtain that goes months without washing holds an extraordinary amount. Decorative pillows that haven't shifted position since last spring are doing the same thing quietly every single day. The air in a room with less layered, stationary fabric has a genuinely different quality. It smells cleaner. It feels lighter. That particular crispness you notice sometimes when you walk into a simply furnished room and something in you just settles without quite knowing why. Warmth and comfort still matter enormously here. Home should feel like home, especially at this stage of life. The distinction is simply between fabric in regular use and fabric that's purely decorative and largely stationary. The throw we reach for on a cool evening takes care of itself through use. The display pillows that haven't moved since spring are worth an honest look. This isn't about a bare room, it's about an unburdened one. There's a difference, and it's something you feel the moment you walk in. This next one works quietly, because it's completely out of sight. Amish bed frames are simple, raised, and the floor underneath is always clear, accessible, cleanable, nothing stored down there, nothing forgotten. Most of us have used that space for practical storage over the years. Boxes, extra blankets, out-of-season things. It solves a real problem, and there's nothing wrong with that instinct. But fabric stored loosely under a bed, in open bags, unwrapped, or in boxes without proper lids, sheds fibers continuously into a space where air is moving while we sleep. Clearing that space entirely, or switching to flat containers with properly fitted lids, is a change that's invisible from the outside. You won't see it, but a bedroom with nothing accumulating underneath becomes a quieter place to rest. That's worth doing for its own sake, quietly and without ceremony. We've moved now from small surfaces to whole rooms, from the corner of a windowsill to the space under where we sleep. The same idea running through all of it. Less for dust to land on, less for it to hide it in. Now, let's look at the two rooms where this matters most in daily life. An Amish kitchen counter is mostly counter, a working surface kept clear. For working, tools come out when they're needed and go back when the job is done. Nothing lives on the counter that isn't used every single day. Our kitchens collect appliances gradually over years. A toaster, a coffee maker, a stand mixer from one productive baking season that never quite made it back to the cabinet, an air fryer, a blender, each one genuinely useful. That isn't the question. The question is whether all of them need to live on the counter permanently or whether they've simply settled there because no one has asked them to move. Appliances in a kitchen collect a particular kind of buildup. Cooking particles and fine grease combine with household dust and bond to surfaces differently than they do in other rooms. The crevices of a toaster, the base of a coffee maker, the back panel where the cord meets the machine. These almost never get fully cleaned because the appliance is always sitting in the way. Decide what you use every single day. Those earn their counter space. Everything touched once a week or less lives just as comfortably in a cabinet, and the counter that remains is one you can wipe clean in 30 seconds. The kitchen feels different when that happens. Less like a place that stores things and also has a stove, and more like a space that genuinely belongs to the person cooking in it. And paper, before we leave the kitchen entirely, deserves a quick mention here, because it belongs in this same conversation. Older paper sheds its own fine fibers as it ages. A stack of catalogs and mail that's been sitting on the counter since last month has been collecting dust from the air and releasing its own particles into the room the entire time. It works in both directions simultaneously. Mail that arrives needs somewhere specific to go. A decision, a folder, a small basket, cleared at the end of each week. That's the whole system. And when those piles disappear, the surface underneath exists again in a way that feels genuinely satisfying. A counter you haven't properly seen in months. Suddenly, there again. Now, here's the idea that changes everything that came before it. And it's the one worth spending the most time with, because it moves us from cleaning to something else entirely. Nothing in an Amish home stays permanently on display. Things appear when they're relevant, a season, a gathering, a particular week, and are stored again when that time passes, not as a minimalist statement, not as a design philosophy, just as a natural, unhurried rhythm of living with objects. Things have a time to be present and a time to rest somewhere safe. Many of us grew up around a version of this, even if we wouldn't have named it that way. The good china that came out on Sunday and went carefully back after. The special tablecloth kept folded in the linen drawer for occasions. The vase that held flowers in spring and then found its way to the shelf in the hall cupboard when summer passed. Things stayed meaningful, partly because they weren't always out, because there was a sense of occasion to them, a moment when they appeared and felt like something. There's a practice worth considering. Some families keep what you might call a seasonal trunk or a Sunday box, a single container, clearly labeled, where the things belonging to a particular time of year rest safely between their seasons. Autumn brings out the wool runner for the hallway, the heavier throw, the particular bowl that always held apples in October. Spring brings something else back. The rotation isn't complicated. It's just intentional. And here's the practical side, because storing things well matters as much as the storing itself. Clear lidded containers mean you can see what's inside without opening everything. Cotton bags protect delicate items while still letting them breathe. Labels mean nothing gets lost and nothing gets forgotten. The things in storage are genuinely resting, not disappearing into attic disorder, not becoming the items you find years later and can't quite remember keeping. When you bring something out after a season away, there's a quiet pleasure in it, a small rediscovery, a moment of, oh, that. The object feels present in a way that something sitting on the same shelf for 3 years simply cannot. This is what moves a home from cleaning to curating, from managing what's accumulated to making thoughtful choices about what's present and when. When objects don't stay in one place indefinitely, dust never settles permanently around them. The whole home gets touched more regularly. Nothing accumulates invisibly for months at a time, and the things that carry meaning are protected rather than just surrounded. That isn't a chore. That's something closer to a craft. The last idea is the simplest one, and it's the thread that ties everything together into something you can actually use tomorrow. Amish families don't rely on a deep clean every Saturday and then let things accumulate all week. What they do instead is something much quieter, At the end of each day, there's a short walk through the home, 5 minutes, sometimes less, where anything that landed on a temporary surface gets returned to where it belongs. The mail that came in gets put somewhere specific. The sweater left on the chair goes back to its hook. The glass from the afternoon makes it to the kitchen. The counter gets a quick wipe. Nothing is deep cleaned. Nothing is reorganized. It's just a gentle return to baseline, the home settling back to its resting state before the day ends. This works because it's small enough to actually do. It doesn't require motivation or a particular kind of energy. It takes about as much effort as making a cup of tea, and what it prevents is the slow accumulation that turns a comfortable home into one that feels quietly overwhelming, not because anything dramatic happened, but because small things landed and stayed day after day until the surfaces disappeared under them. If the kitchen felt like too much this week, leave it. Just look at that one windowsill. If the windowsill was enough for now, that's enough. This isn't a project with a deadline. It's just a slightly different way of moving through the spaces you already know well, and a slightly different way of thinking about what deserves to be out, what deserves to be protected, and what might simply deserve a rest, somewhere safe. What Amish families arrived at, without a name for it, without a book attached, is something genuinely simple. A home stays calm, not through cleaning more, but through giving dust fewer places to claim, not through effort alone, but through the quiet decisions that happen before the cleaning even begins. What stays out and what rests. What's displayed and what's protected. What has a permanent home and what earns a seasonal one. The dust will still come. It always does. But it won't have quite as many places to settle, and the things that matter most, the ones worth keeping, the ones that carry real meaning, will be cared for rather than just surrounded. That isn't a small thing. That's the difference between a home that feels managed and a home that feels like yours. If today felt useful, there's more on the channel that follows this same thread. Quiet, practical ideas for a home that feels manageable and genuinely peaceful at this stage of life. There's a video linked at the end that picks up naturally from here, and we think you'll find it just as worthwhile. We'll see you there.